Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Clinton's Bog Adventures. Today, we're focusing on late season wildflowers. For us, that means about the beginning of August, maybe to mid-September. We're along Admiral Road right now and there's a lot going on, so let's take a look. One of the wildflowers I look most forward to in this late season is this one, giant sunflower. Giant sunflower looks very different from your garden variety giant sunflowers. This is a native, not a cultivar. And as you can see, giant sunflower is pretty tall. I'm not the tallest person in the world, but giant sunflower certainly can shoot up past 6 or 7 feet. Pretty common along the wetter areas, along the roadsides, especially Admiral Road, where we are right now. A wonderful plant. I like it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's covered in really stiff hairs. I really like a tactile plant. So it's very rough on the leaves, very rough on the stem. And it's also really important for our late season finches. If you think about goldfinches, they don't start nesting until maybe around now. This is a hefty food source for some of these late season seed eaters like goldfinches or pine siskins, birds like that. So a super awesome, really important species, giant sunflower. A lot of our plants that are named aster, like purple-stemmed aster or like lance-leaved aster, a lot of them don't even bloom until about mid-August and way into September. Not just our wetland species like lance-leaved and purple-stemmed, but even asters in the woods like large-leaved aster, which is fairly common in the North Woods. We have it in the bog. And calico aster, which are those tiny little white asters that you might see walking through trails when you're up in the North Woods. So this season, tons and tons of diversity, even in relatively small areas. Aster diversity is really great. You get a lot of whites like this flat-topped aster. You get purple like purple-stemmed. But a lot of our asters up in the bog are sort of wetland species like flat-topped and purple-stemmed and lance leaves. Lots and lots of nice wetland diversity at this time of year generally for our wildflowers, but especially out of our asters. So one of the really cool things about our late season is truly the diversity that you can find. Out of our goldenrods, there's a number of species, maybe 7 or 8 species that you might be able to find at this time of year if you're in the right habitats. The great thing about the Sax-Zim bog is we have a diversity of habitats. So you find species like this, gray goldenrod, which I usually associate with more upland habitats, almost right next door to some of our wetland specialists like giant goldenrod, bog goldenrod, or habitat generalists like Canada goldenrod. So great time to sort of look for these bright patches of yellow. So when you're walking around checking out all the goldenrod diversity, one thing you might see are other things happening to these goldenrods. This is a very short, giant goldenrod, but if we feel its stem, it's got a nice smooth stem where Canada has a fuzzy stem. But you can see there's a few things happening. Number one are these 2 bulbs. Those are both galls. There's a variety of different kinds of galls, but they're basically formed by either a fly or a wasp, sort of that is parasitizing this plant. That plant is responding to that sort of intrusion by laying an egg, and it's going to expand, which creates a nice home for that larvae for that fly or that wasp. But if we look close, there's also a couple of other things happening. Number one is this, which is another different kind of leaf miner, sort of an eye spot leaf miner. Could be a moth, could be a fly, a really interesting thing to look at. And one last little beauty, right on top of this goldenrod is a nice goldenrod crab spider just hiding and waiting for the next pollinator to come on through. So if you follow along with plant phenology and sort of the seasons, you know that aster season is late season, but it's also gentian season. And this is a really cool one. This is one that we just found in the last couple of weeks. Sort of getting to the end, but this is called Great Lakes gentian, or red stem gentian, or closed gentian. It looks a lot like bottle gentian, but there's a few differences. If you will look at the top here, we can see these leaves sort of surrounding the flowers are a lot more slender than you see on bottle gentian that have big, huge leaves near the flowers. And if you look at the flowers themselves, you can see that it doesn't take much to open them. There's no teeth that hold the tips of these flowers together like they do on bottle gentian. They still utilize bees. Bees can still get in there and pollinate them just like in bottle gentian. But these are sort of a really neat one, sort of endemic to the Great Lakes region. You don't really find them anywhere outside of the Great Lakes region. So you can find them in northern Wisconsin and Michigan and Ontario, places like that, but not further inland. So it's a really cool one and a nice special one to have here in the bog. So we've seen some white flowers and some pink flowers and some blue flowers, but the other color of sort of our late season is yellow. And I wanted to point out this yellow one because it can oftentimes get lost in all of the other yellows. This is Canada hawkweed. It is one of our native hawkweeds, and I'm pointing that out because nearly every other hawkweed you see in northern Minnesota is a non-native. Orange hawkweed, a couple of the tall yellow hawkweeds, all those are non-native. This one, however, is a really nice native. It also blooms really late. I've seen this blooming up into September in some places, so it's a super important, really late season pollinator plant. We think about queen bumblebees, not a lot of options when you get into September, when those bees might still be flying. But Canada hawkweed is one of those really nice late season native hawkweeds. Oh, I love this plant. This is spotted Joe pieweed. Really adds that really heavy pop of purple and pink to our wetland ecosystems. It smells really good, it looks really good, and this is an incredible pollinator plant. This one we sort of flushed everything away, but there's a number of bees on this when we arrived. There's been a monarch butterfly that's been nectaring on this. So it's an incredibly important pollinator plant. Awesome wetland species. This does have a counterpart that you might not know about in woodland Joe pieweed. It looks nearly the same, but it has white flowers, and it doesn't grow in wetlands. It grows out in the woods. So this is a wonderful, wonderful little plant. Super cool leaves too. If we look down from above, they're whorled, and whorled leaves are not super common in the plant world, but we can see they ring around the stem. Really obvious and a super cool little plant. So many of our late season wildflowers are wetland specialists, and I really like the more obscure wetland species. But if we look around, maybe we can see these pink sort of clusters of flowers that are surrounding me. So this is a wetland plant called arrow-leaved tear thumb. Tear thumb because it's covered in spines. So if you grab it too hard, it's going to cut you and you're going to bleed. A lot of some really cool wetland species are a little more aggressive. They'll grab you. Rice-leaved cutgrass is an example of that. But that's sort of how these plants are getting dispersed. This is a buckwheat. Tear thumb is a buckwheat, so it's got these weird little flower heads, tiny little seeds, and an easy way for it to get moved from place to place is by people or white-tailed deer or moose. It'll grab a hold and drop off when it's ready. So the final plant that I want to talk about today is sort of inconspicuous, but it's a really, really important one when you consider pollinators and our queen bees that are often late in the season. This is northern bush honeysuckle. Northern bush honeysuckle will bloom sometimes into September. It grows really low, it grows in disturbed areas, and often gets lost hidden with the other yellows and whites of our sort of late season wildflowers, but super important one to consider. Something to look for the next time you're out and about in the Sax-Zim bog. Still plenty of time in the season for our wildflowers. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Clinton's Bog Ventures. Until next time, we'll see you in the bog.